In December of 1944, the German army put tanks into the Ardennes that the American army could not beat gun for gun. The Panther's upper glacis was 3.1 inches of rolled steel laid back at 55 degrees from the vertical. The King Tiger carried close to 6 inches on the same plate at 50 degrees and 180 millimeters across the turret front. The standard American medium tank in that sector was the Sherman, carrying the 75mm gun. That gun could not defeat either plate from the front at any range on that battlefield. Not at 1,000 yards. Not at 200. Not at point blank with the muzzle almost touching the armor. The weather made it worse. From the 16th of December, the cloud sat low over the Ardennes and the Allied tactical air forces, which had spent the autumn hunting German columns on open roads, flew almost nothing. The Germans had chosen the week for exactly that reason. The result contradicted all of it. On the 18th of December, Omar Bradley telephoned George Patton. 91 hours later, 3 American divisions attacked north out of Lorraine into the flank of the German offensive. 4 days after that, a tank column came up the road out of Assenois and opened a corridor into Bastogne. What everyone remembers about that is the turn. 48 hours, 90 degrees, an entire army. The record supports about half of it, and the half it does not support is the more interesting half, because turning the army was not the hard part. Once those divisions were pointed north, the 4th Armored Division had roughly 12 miles of hard-surfaced highway left to cover between Martelange and Bastogne. In good conditions, that is half an hour of driving. It took 4 days. On the 15th of December, the Third Army stood about 150 road miles from Bastogne, facing the wrong way. The Third Army was in Lorraine and the Saar, facing east, in contact along most of its front. It was not resting, and it was not in reserve. Patton had an offensive of his own set to open on the 19th of December, an attack into the Saar industrial region that was supposed to carry the Third Army across the German border. Ammunition had been stacked for it. Artillery had been surveyed in for it. Every division in the army was oriented on an axis running east. An army in that condition cannot simply be told to go north. Divisions in contact have to be disengaged, which means somebody has to hold the ground they are standing on while they leave it. Artillery has to displace, and artillery that is displacing is artillery that is not firing. Fuel and ammunition sit in dumps that were sited to feed an attack going the other way. And every one of those divisions moves on the same road network, which in that country in that month meant 2-lane roads under ice and fog. The planning did not start on the 19th. It started on the 12th. Colonel Oskar Koch, the 3rd Army intelligence officer, had been tracking German formations moving in behind the Eifel and told Patton he was looking at a serious enemy concentration opposite the American 8th Corps. By the 18th, Koch had identified 9 German divisions in front of that one corps, which was more than faced the entire Third Army. On the strength of that reading, Patton had already instructed his Chief of Staff, Brigadier General Hobart Gay, and his operations officer, Colonel Halley Maddox, to work up contingency plans for a Third Army counterattack in the event of a major penetration. The plans existed before the crisis did. They were dated the 12th of December, 4 days after the German assembly began showing up in Koch's reports, and 4 days before the attack opened. Bradley telephoned at 10:30 in the morning on the 18th. Within minutes, Patton had Gay and Maddox drafting the specific movement orders. At 8:15 that evening, he met the 3rd Corps commander, Major General John Milliken, and settled the routes 2 divisions would use for their approach, march north, without yet knowing what their objectives would be. The 3rd Corps headquarters itself started moving from Metz to Arlon that same night. By midnight, 1 combat command of the 4th Armored Division was already on the road toward Longwy. At first light on the 19th, the rest of the 4th Armored followed it, and the 80th Infantry Division began moving toward Luxembourg City. All of that happened before the conference that gets the credit. The German force in the Ardennes was not a paper threat, and the matchup deserves stating at full strength before anything is taken away from it. For the offensive, the German command assembled something on the order of 2,000 tanks and assault guns behind a 60-mile front, with roughly 1,900 artillery pieces. The armored corps included Panther battalions, Panzer IV battalions, and the heavy tank battalions with the King Tiger. Against the armor the Americans had in that sector, the quality gap was real, and it was not close. Take the Panther. Its upper front plate defeated the American 75mm gun outright. The later American 76mm gun could beat it only in a narrow band of conditions with the best ammunition available, and that ammunition was scarce. The King Tiger was worse. Its glacis is generally treated as immune to frontal penetration by every Allied tank gun in the field that winter, and it mounted the 88mm gun that could destroy a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman could not answer at all. American crews knew this. They had known it since Normandy. The tactics that came out of that knowledge were flanking, ambush, artillery, and numbers, and none of them are pleasant things to build a doctrine on when the alternative is being outranged. But the German offensive carried a defect that no amount of armor thickness covered. It did not have the fuel to finish. Estimates of the fuel stockpiled for the attack run between 4 and 5 million gallons, which the German planners themselves reckoned at about 6 days of movement. The plan closed that gap by capturing American fuel. Did not work. Between the 17th and the 19th of December, American supply troops pulled more than 3 million gallons of petroleum products out of the Spa and Stavelot area, which included the largest dump the leading German column came near. A German battle group did take about 50,000 gallons at Bullingen, and 50,000 gallons does not move a panzer division very far. The other defect was ammunition. By the 22nd of December, the German 5th Parachute Division, holding the ground the 3rd Corps was about to attack across, was rationed to 7 rounds per howitzer per day. Yeah. That is a division being told it may fire 1 fire mission of any weight and then stop. So, the honest statement of the matchup is this. The Germans had the better tanks, the better week of weather, and the initiative. The Americans had a fuel and ammunition system that was still working, and a headquarters that had done its arithmetic 6 days early. On the morning of the 19th of December, Patton held a staff meeting at 7 o'clock and dictated 3 axes on which the 3rd Corps could attack. The first ran due north through Luxembourg and Diekirch towards Saint-Vith. The second ran from Arlon north to Bastogne. The third ran from Neufchâteau towards Saint-Hubert into the western part of the salient. Each axis got a code word, so that one telephone call from wherever Patton happened to be would set the correct plan running without another conference. The words that come down in the accounts are cent, nickel, and dime. Those words appear in the histories rather than in a reproduced Third Army order, so treat the trio as the tradition rather than as a document you can pull from a file. Patton left for Verdun at 9:15 with Colonel Paul Harkins and Colonel Charles Codeman. What was said in that room at Verdun is genuinely contested, and it is worth saying so out loud rather than picking the most dramatic version. Every account agrees that Eisenhower asked how quickly the Third Army could counterattack and wanted a strong blow of at least 6 divisions. Beyond that, the accounts split. In sum, Patton offers 3 divisions on the morning of the 21st, and Eisenhower tells him to make it the 22nd. In others, Patton offers the 22nd or the 23rd, and Eisenhower accepts. In others, again, the exchange gets compressed into a promise of 48 or 72 hours, with no date attached at all. The part that is not contested is what happened next. Patton left the room, gave the code, and the movement that had begun the previous midnight continued without a pause. The attack went in at 6 in the morning on the 22nd of December across a front of about 20 miles. That is 66 hours after the Verdun conference, and roughly 4 days after Bradley's telephone call. Millikin had 3 divisions. The 26th Infantry Division under Major General Willard Paul, the 80th Infantry Division under Major General Horace McBride, and the 4th Armoured Division under Major General Hugh Gaffey. 11 field artillery battalions were attached to the call by Third Army, and every one of them was in action somewhere else when the order came. Each infantry division picked up a tank battalion and a self-propelled tank destroyer battalion. None of these formations arrived fresh. The 4th Armoured had been fighting in Lorraine and started north, short 21 Shermans and short more than 700 men. The 80th Infantry Division made a march of about 150 miles. The 4th Armoured's own road march is variously given between 150 and 161 miles, depending on which unit and which start point a source counts, which is itself a useful fact about how these movements actually work. During that rush, the 8th Tank Battalion alone had 33 tanks drop out of the column with mechanical failures. 33 tanks. Not to enemy action. To road miles, ice, and worn final drives on vehicles that had been in continuous action for months. The Corps attacked at 6 without artillery preparation, trading the weight of a barrage for the chance of surprise. The 80th Division made extensive gains on the first day through the Borscheid Triangle, ground that the official history describes as thick forest, deep ravines, and masked ridges forming a checkerboard of small compartments. Snow had fallen during the night. The roads were repeatedly described in the reports as sheer ice. Then it slowed. Martelange IV, armored, found the bridge over the shore, destroyed, and a large crater in the road, and the column stopped while engineers bridged it. That is the 12-mile stretch to Bastogne, and it began with the tanks sitting still. At Chaumont on the 23rd, Combat Command B ran into the German 11th Assault Gun Brigade, which fielded between 10 and 15 rebuilt Panzer, 3 hulls mounting 75mm guns. Major Albin Erzeich, commanding the 8th Tank Battalion, called it the bitterest fighting his battalion had encountered. The 4th Armoured lost 11 Shermans there in a day. Company A of the 10th Armoured Infantry Battalion took about 65 casualties. At Warnock on the 24th Combat Command, fought what the division reckoned its hardest action of the entire Bastogne operation. The Americans inflicted about 135 casualties on the defenders and took roughly the same number of prisoners, at a cost of 68 officers and men. Milliken's instruction to his commanders was to stop trying to clear the villages one by one. Bypass these towns, he told them, and clear them up later. The 4th Armoured was the middle division of 3. The 2 infantry divisions on its flanks were doing the work that kept its road usable. On the left, before dawn on the 22nd, the 104th and the 328th Infantry of the 26th Division moved out of assembly areas east of Arlon. Their line of departure was the Atter River. From there they pushed north through dense woods at a pace their own reports call cautious. On the right, the 80th Division took Heidescheid on the 23rd and held it against a counterattack that came in with 11 German tanks, 2 of which its bazooka teams destroyed. On Christmas Day, the 317th Infantry attacked Kiemen and took close to 200 casualties in the day. That is 1 regiment on 1 objective in 1 day. If either flank had given way, the corridor the 4th Armoured opened on the 26th would have been cut behind it within a day. On the 23rd of December, the weather broke, and it stayed broken for 5 days. That single fact changed the arithmetic on both sides of the salient. More than 600 9th Air Force bombers went up, reinforced by 417 heavy bombers from the 8th Air Force, against bridges, rail yards, and road centers. 9th Air Force fighters flew close to 700 sorties. Part of that effort spent suppressing anti-aircraft fire so that the Troop Carrier Command could put 334 tons of supplies into Bastogne by parachute. Between the 23rd and the 31st of December, the 9th Air Force flew 10,305 sorties and lost 158 aircraft doing it. Air power did not open the road to Bastogne. It made the ground the Germans had to hold expensive to hold. It was also not free, and the price is worth stating in the same breath as the tonnage. The airlift into Bastogne ran again on the 27th with 130 cargo aircraft and 32 gliders. German anti-aircraft fire over the drop zone was accurate by then, and of 13 C-47 transports, the 440th Troop Carrier Group put over the town that day, 4 came back. On the 26th, Combat Command Reserve of the 4th Armoured, under Colonel Wendell Blanchard, worked around to the west and came at Bastogne through Clochimont and Assenois. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams commanded the 37th Tank Battalion in that command. The division's 3 organic artillery battalions, the 22nd, the 66th, and the 94th Armored Field Artillery, put a concentration onto Bastogne in the late afternoon, and the tank column ran straight into the falling shells rather than waiting for them to lift. First Lieutenant Charles Boggess led it in a Sherman assault tank named Cobra King, bumper number C6. He reached the engineers of the 101st Airborne Division outside Bastogne in the late afternoon. Abrams and Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe shook hands at 10 minutes past 5 in the evening. Bastogne itself was not clear until 8 that night. The corridor was one road, and the Germans still held ground on both sides of it. 40 supply trucks and 70 ambulances went up that road during the night. By noon on the 28th, 964 casualties had been evacuated out of Bastogne, along with about 700 German prisoners. For the drive from the 22nd to the 26th, the 4th Armored Division reported 661 casualties, 220 of them dead or missing. What decided it was not a decision. The Third Army moved north on staff work that had been rehearsed in advance and executed by an organization that had done nothing else since Normandy. Patton said so himself in the driest possible terms. The highly complicated road and supply movements, he wrote, were only made possible by the old and very experienced General Staff of the Third Army. Look at what that staff was moving. In the second half of December the 3rd, Army's ammunition trains were running at an average of 4,500 tons a day. That is the figure that stands up best in the official record, and it is the one that matters, because an army that turns 90 degrees and arrives without ammunition has not turned at all. Third Army's own accounting of the redeployment adds miles of road reconnoitered, thousands of miles of telephone wire strung, tons of new map sheets printed and issued for a sector nobody had been planning to fight in, and dozens of new dumps opened forward. Those figures come from the Army's own after-action summary, rather than from an independent audit, so take them as the staff's account of its own week. The mechanics underneath them are simple to state and brutal to execute. Route allocation. 2 divisions cannot share a 2-lane road going the same direction unless somebody decides in advance who owns which hours on which stretch. When that decision is not made in advance, the columns interleave, and a column that has interleaved cannot be unpicked in the dark. Traffic control. Military police standing at junctions with the route plan in their hands, turning vehicles that do not belong on that road. On ice, a single truck that slides broadside across a cutting stops everything behind it for as long as it takes to winch it clear, and everything behind it in that week was a division. Artillery displacing inbounds. A battalion does not pick up all 12 of its guns and drive north. It moves a battery at a time, so that at every moment of the road march some part of the artillery is emplaced, surveyed, and able to fire. That is why the 3rd Corps could attack at 6 in the morning on the 22nd, with 11 field artillery battalions in support, and why roughly 35 battalions of field artillery ended up participating in the relief operation as it developed. Guns that displace all at once are guns that are absent all at once. Dumps forward of the tank. fuel and ammunition placed on the new axis before the vehicles that need them arrive, not after. A tank that has driven 160 miles is a tank that needs fuel at the end of 160 miles, and if the fuel is where the old dump was, the tank is scrap metal parked in a field. You can see the value of all of it most clearly in the place where it failed. On the 31st of December, Combat Command B of the 6th Armored Division arrived behind Bastogne 6 hours late. Not because of German action, because it had become entangled with the 11th Armored Division on iced roads, and the traffic did not sort itself out. 6 hours of a fresh armored combat command, removed from the battle by congestion on a road. That is the mechanism. When the traffic plan works, nobody writes it down and a general gets a legend. When it fails, an armored division sits in a queue. The legend overstates both ends of this. The first is the turn itself. 90 degrees is a fair description of the change of axis, but an entire army did not make it. The 20th Corps under Walton Walker stayed facing east on the Saar and held that front while the 3rd and 12th Corps went north. The 3rd Army did not pick itself up and rotate. It split, held with one hand and swung with the other, and the holding is the reason the swinging was possible. As for 48 hours, the attack went in 66 hours after Verdun and roughly 91 hours after Bradley's telephone call, with the 1st Combat Command already rolling before the Verdun conference began, and the contingency planning 6 days old by then. The second is what the relief of Bastogne actually settled. Less than the story usually gives it. The German drive for the Meuse had already stopped before the corridor opened. The leading elements of the 2nd Panzer Division reached Celles, about 6 miles short of Dinant, on the 24th of December and stopped there out of fuel, and the American 2nd Armored Division destroyed the pocket over the following 2 days. The offensive had culminated on its own, from the same fuel arithmetic it started with. And Bastogne did not become safe on the 26th. It became contested from both sides. On the 30th, the Germans attacked from east and west to close the ring again. The 1st Panzer Division of the Waffenschutzstaffel with fewer than 50 tanks, and the Führer Escort Brigade with roughly 40 Panzer IV tanks and 30 assault guns. American infantry companies were overrun at L'Outrebois and at Villers-les-Bains. By the 2nd of January, the corridor was 15 to 20 miles deep and holding. German artillery was still ranging the town 2 weeks after that. The last shells fell on Bastogne on the 15th of January. So what the 4th Armored achieved on the 26th of December was not the end of a battle. It was a road. One road under fire wide enough for 110 vehicles in a night. Armor moves at the speed of the headquarters that plans it. The Panther's 3.1 inches of sloped glacis was a real advantage, and it stayed a real advantage through the whole campaign. It did not help the 2nd Panzer Division at Celles because the fuel was not there. It did not help the German formations south of Bastogne because they were rationed to 7 rounds per howitzer, while 11 American artillery battalions came into range of them and roughly 35 ended up firing on that operation. The Sherman crews who came up the Arlon road had the worst tank, and they knew it, and it did not decide the week. What decided the week was that somebody on the 3rd Army staff had drawn 3 routes on a map on the 12th of December, given each one a word, and worked out which battalion owned which road at which hour. 12 miles took 4 days. That is the honest measure of how hard the last part was. The first 160 were the easy ones, and they were easy because a staff had already done them on paper before the first tank turned its nose north.